BJ Counsel. I view the world through the lens of having been followed by a white clerk as a child while shopping in a five and dime. I'm a retired police executive and own UN50, which gives guidance on surviving interactions with police.
I'm Harmony Chavis, and I view the world through the lens of one of the most misunderstood and diverse generations in our nation's history. I'm a social worker and a believer of radical kindness and love as modalities of healing.
My name is Andrew Counsel. I view the world through the lens of a generational camera phone. I wake up as a black male and go to bed as a black male. I am surviving this never-ending court case we commonly call life in the best way I know how.
Welcome to our live UN50 on Facebook. This is our first live stream for UN50. Welcome to those of you that are joining us. So we're going to be talking about We Are Allies. So I'm going to let our folks introduce, for those of you who may not know who is with us, and those of you may be joining us for the first time. UN50 is about how to working with individuals and teaching them how to safely interact with law enforcement. We've been in business since 2015 and working with the city of Durham and other communities locally and beyond. And one of the things that we do is that we talk about the community, how to safely interact, but we also talk about mental health and anything that kind of relates back to law enforcement, trying to empower the community and how they can work in this moment to get the individual agencies in their community. One of the things that I believe in is that there is a national conversation going on about policing in this moment, but what I would also encourage people to look in locally. It's a national narrative, but it's a local action. And so we're going to be talking about today, perspective of being Black police officers in this moment. And my guests are with me are executives who have retired from the Durham City Police Department, and I'll let them introduce themselves. But the first person I want to introduce to you is one of my co-hosts, Harmony Chavis, who has been with me since we started this podcast back in 2020. So Harmony, you want to kind of let them know who you are?
I should do this every time.
and why you are?
Are you using the cup I got you?
I am using your cup. She got me a cup that says all as one and we will rise above. So I love it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. So my name is Harmony Chavis. I work for an insurtech startup here in Durham. My background is as a social worker. What else about me? I believe in radical love and kindness as acts of activism and resistance. And I've been saying this a lot to a lot of different people because I think that as people that are trying to mobilize in their communities, sometimes it can be hard to kind of step away and have some me time. So if you're listening to this today, this is a reminder that Black joy is indeed an act of resistance. And sometimes that's more than enough.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My radical person. I love it. We also have another co-host, a regular co-host. His name is Andrew. He's actually my nephew, but he is working his way out of a cave down in Mexico. So he wasn't able to join us tonight. So, but when you listen to our podcast, our primary co-host is Harmony and Andrew. We started a series called We Are Allies, and these individuals are my friends and co-workers from the Durham City Police Department, and I reached out to them to see if they would want to participate in this conversation coming from the perspective of Black police officers, Black executives, and communicating that to our community. So first person I'm going to introduce you to is Assistant Chief Mr. Jesse Burwell. Can you talk to him a little bit about who you are, sir?
Yes, good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jesse Burwell, and I was a non-sworn assistant chief for the City of Durham Police Department. I got promoted to that position in 2006, and I retired in 2017. Before that, I was the department's fiscal manager. I managed the budget.
Thank you, Jesse. And then we have Mr. Terrence Sembly, assistant chief as well. Can you talk to a little bit about you, Mr. Sembly, and let me just go ahead and say why he has a really big grin on his face, and we appreciate him bringing his information or his talent to us today because he's at the beach. He's doing what retired folks do. He's at the beach. So thank you, Terrence. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, absolutely. I really appreciate the offer to be here. My name is Terrence Sembly. I was with Durham Police Department for 23 years. I was going to say graduated, retired in February 2020. So I've been retired a little over a year now, and I retired from Durham Police Department as deputy chief. At that time of retirement, I was over the Investigative Services Bureau. So that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, I'm at the beach, relaxing. So just, I'm a little more casual than everybody else, but that's okay.
That's okay, man. You're retired. And I apologize because I had a brain cramp and to make sure that I didn't want to demote Terrence. He is retired as a deputy police chief. So my apologies.
That's fine.
And then last and of course not least is my buddy. I'll call him my private pastor, my personal pastor.
That's right.
Winslow Forbes. Introduce yourself, sir.
Yes, I would like to say good evening to everyone as well. Again, my name is Winslow Forbes. I retired in 2016 at the rank of Assistant Chief with Durham Police Department with 30 years of service. And Deputy Chief Counsel, we go way back. She used to be my boss, and she was very nice to me. I'll say that. She was very nice to me. Love her to death.
Well, checks in the mail. Checks in the mail.
Yes, very nice.
So I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. So just, again, I just want to kind of reiterate that this is a new series that I decided to start this year, and it's called We Are Allies. Well, actually, we started last year, but to make it a regular, we made a decision this year. And it was to talk about how, especially during this moment, Black officers, how they're navigating that and how they're viewed in our community. It means something to me to be able to people to hear our perspective. And that comes from the fact that we, in some communities and some folks, we are ostracized because they don't believe that we can be Black and blue. And so we want to make sure that our voices are heard, that we're here, we see our community, we want to help our community. And so start off is that we want to just make sure that we understand the history of policing. I think we all understand the history of policing is based in slavery, returning enslaved persons back to that as it evolved over the years, moving it, that people were basically for lack of better words, almost every person was deputized to say that they could go and return Black and brown bodies back to their owners. And then the evolution to Ku Klux Klan, and then individuals becoming part of law enforcement. So for me, I think one of the things that I would like to see is that the industry itself acknowledges its history. Just simply acknowledge the history, and then that's when we all know we can maybe start moving forward. So I just kind of want to start there and get some input from you guys on that.
Okay, I'll start off by saying that my experience as a African American police officer, when I first got on the police department, I'm from the country, and you all know that. And I'm used to, in the country, everybody you see, you wave and you say hello to them. I mean, that's just how it is. People you don't know, you speak to. And I was with my training officer, and we went into the housing community, and I saw this young Black male. He was walking with his father, and I, put my window down and spoke to the young man, say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I was in shock the way that his father responded to me. He actually snatched his son back and told him, he said, "Hey, look, that's the police. You don't talk to them." And, I went home that evening very disappointed because, as you said early, Deputy Chief, we there to help the community. And that was one reason why I went into law enforcement, to make a difference. And then on another occasion, when I was assigned to a different unit, actually CAT, the unit that I work under your leadership, and I was conducting a raid, and this young boy, he was approximately, I would say 11 years of age, and he walked up to me and my partner. We were standing outside the door, and he walked up, he said, "You dirty cops, if I had a gun, I would shoot you." And again, when I saw that, I said something that we have to do different, to reach our young people, let them know that, even though with the history, as you stated before, that all police officers are not bad and we're out there to try to help. And that also pushed me to start a youth program where I've been working with the young people now going on 19 years. And a lot of the young people that I have worked with, initially, that was their opinion about the police, that they hated the police. And after they got to know myself and other police officers, because several officers help out with the program, they began to have a different look on the police, whereas to the point that, some have now became police officer, some have gone to the military. So I think we can make a change by being involved and getting out in our community.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for saying that about your organization. And we got to make sure we put a link on that too for folks that can encourage them to get involved with your organization. And before I forget, for those that are hopefully that are listening to us, if you have a question, please put it in the box, and one of my team members will monitor that. So just chime in, even if you're saying, well, they're not talking about this, go ahead and put it in, and we're more than willing to help answer any kind of questions that you might have tonight. It's kind of just whatever you want to ask. Don't hesitate. We're more than willing to do that. Terrence, you or Jesse, anything you want to add on that, or any experiences, or how you feel about the history?
I was not a non-sworn assistant chief. When I would tell people what I do, not all of them, but a lot of them look at me like I had two heads. So you can kind of see or tell the dislike or distrust of sworn officers. And one of the things I was over when I was a non-sworn assistant chief, I was over recruiting. And that was one area where it was very hard to attract Black applicants. They were just not interested. And I've approached people, one-on-one that I knew were looking for work and that I felt like would be good candidates. And it was just hard. It's just hard to find Blacks, qualified Blacks that want to be. And I'm sure it hasn't changed that much since I left.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in fact, recruiting officers, any Black or white right now with everything that's going on, has got to be difficult across the board. Not just Black employees, but just everything that's going on in the industry right now. Terrence, you got anything?
Yeah, I'll add a little something because I really believe that any Black officer or any officer of color is pretty much going to have the same stories that Chief Forbes was talking about. So I won't dwell on that. However, I will talk about the importance when we talk about being Black and blue. And Chief Counsel, when you were talking about, it's very important to talk about the history and where policing came from the beginning. And if we're going to do anything to fix policing,
right.
We have to start at home. So, I'll just start locally with just the fact that, Durham Police Department got its first Black officers in 1944. We're not talking about a long, long time ago.
Right.
Why? Because they needed to do something, or they call themselves doing something to satisfy the Black community by hiring Black officers. And when we're talking about history, just like I was talking about Chief Forbes and we all having the same story, I think any agency that hired Black officers, no matter when they did it, it's the same story. We hired our Black officers in 1944. They weren't several things. Number one, they weren't even able to cross the tracks.
That's
and
right.
Anybody in Durham knows where the tracks are, right?
Yeah.
We weren't able to arrest or pretty much deal with white people without having to call a white officer over to do it. Officers in Durham, and when they became the first Black officers, were not able to. They were going to hire you. You could not meet. You could not change in the same facilities that the white officers did. I don't even think, and I could be wrong about this fact, but I don't even think it was the same building. They didn't get cars. The equipment was subpar. So when we talk about the history of policing, you're really talking about history in general,
Right.
the way that Black people were treated. I just think it's very important when we talk about can you be Black and blue to talk about the necessity of it because of the history of it.
Wow. Exactly. I'm sitting here thinking that we just had Glenda Beard was on our last podcast, and she was talking about they didn't think she was going to last. So they didn't give her a uniform. You know,
Right.
so they let her ride around and something, but it took them a minute because they didn't think she was going to stay.
And that's something I don't think I've even heard that story.
Yeah, they think she was going to stay. So yeah, I mean, and I think for me, when we talk about this, for what Black the struggle that the Black officers had to deal with internally coming into this industry, and then they didn't want us in anyway, right? And then our own communities are turning against us because we became police officers. So I think, so that's stressful. I think that's stressful. Harmony, you got anything? I know I see you over there shaking your head.
I thought that it was interesting when Sembly said that when we're talking about the policing, like the history of policing, we're talking about history in general. I think it's really important for us to remember that as we are, having these hard discussions, because it does, kind of set the context or the preface for it, if you will. And I'm excited to hear more about your why and why you guys decided to get into this and how you've seen it changed as the years have progressed.
Thanks, Harmony. Jess, I want to go back to you for just before because we're going to go into why we all join law enforcement. But I think it's interesting that, like Jess said, he's non-sworn, and I kind of want you to talk about that a little more. The fact just because you were working with police officers, people looking at you all sideways. I mean, I think that's just uncool in a whole lot of levels. As to how law enforcement is viewed, to even be viewed just because you catching a check and you're not even a police officer. And people, I mean, how was that for you?
It can make you feel kind of funny, but it didn't happen a whole lot, but it happened often enough that I know if you tell certain people that even though you're non-sworn, you're a police executive, and that they have an issue with it. So it just shows me how deep-rooted the problem is,
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm going to go ahead and stick with you, Jess, and then I'll go to we'll talk a little bit while we join. How was it for you when you made the decision? Was there a concern for you prior to becoming like an employee of the police department? How was that for you becoming part of the culture, so to speak? How was that for you as a non-sworn? I mean, the three of us, we love Jesse. I mean, Jesse more popo than me. Jesse rocks and rolls and knows exactly what we need, how we need it, and he would always be there for us. And he understood what law enforcement, the mission and the goals of the Durham Police Department. He got that and he helped us. So I guess I kind of want to know for you, how does that work for you to become part of an organization that has this, perspective, view from most of the folks outside of law enforcement? How was that for you?
Well, it took an adjustment. It took an adjustment. And I actually, I don't want to give you my life history, but, started out as an accountant with American Tobacco Company. When that company folded, I came to the city in the city county planning department. And
Hey, just your volume's a little low, so make sure you turn your volume up. So make sure we can hear you.
okay. So I came to the police department from the city county planning department. I started at the city county planning department in 1988 and worked there till about 1990. And it was one person in the city county planning department that was a former police officer. And while a lot of people were telling me that I needed to think twice about that because crazy culture, he said, Jesse, with your knowledge and with your personality, you gonna go over there and you will be fine.
Wow. Yeah.
That's what he told me. I won't call his name, but I still remember his name. He said, with your knowledge and with your personality, he said, you'll be fine. And so, I made the decision to do it because the position from at the police department was actually a promotion for me, leaving the city county planning department. So I just said, I'm going to go for it. And I ended up making it a home.
You did. And I'm glad you took his advice because I forever indebted to Jesse Burwell. He's the man. Yeah, he is the man. So thank you, Jesse. So Forbes, so how you said you did you always want to be the popo?
No, actually, up through college, I wanted to be a Marine. And but my mind changed. The military got to the point where they were not accepting a lot of officers. So that made me start looking at law enforcement, something that was paramilitary. And so once I got into it, my initial plan was I'm going to go and serve 3 years and then I'm going to go federal, join the Secret Service. But of course, once I got in it, I started enjoying the job, met a lot of good people. And then I saw how I really could help and make a difference in the community.
Right.
Because, in local law enforcement, so many different divisions that you can serve in. Mm-hmm. And so I, got blessed when I started getting promoted and I was receiving good assignments. It kept me there. Right. And so once I made the 10-year mark, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to stay and make a career out of it. And so at that point, I stayed and made a career out of it. But like I said, as I look back in my life now, if I had to do it over, I would do it again because I feel like that I met a lot of good people. And also when I look back and I reflect, even the arrests that I made and who knows how many arrests that I made in my career, I feel like I always did it right. So I feel good about that.
Yeah, and you have a service, service attitude too. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where your core, and that's what we need: officers who have that automatic service attitude. Go ahead, Terrence. What about you?
I'll say this, and you all heard the story. Everybody's probably heard this story, but it's important, and it's important to me about why I came into law enforcement. Now, did I want to be a police officer? I don't know. I don't think so. I just, in the I think it was the 10th grade, I walked into a classroom and there stood this man that looked like me. Wow. It was a criminal justice class, and there stood this man, especially, you think it's bad now. You definitely didn't have a lot of black teachers back in the day, especially males.
Right.
So I walk into this criminal justice class and there stood this man that looked like me. And, he was just a tall guy and he had his suit on and he was just cool. He had charisma. This man had character and he just caught everyone's attention. I went to school in Fayetteville and so military family, nothing was all black or all white in my environment. So, there stood this man that looked like me and he just captured my attention and he was everything that I now know a leader should be. And he taught us criminal justice, and he was very kind of laid back, casual with us. He came to our level, to tell you the truth.
Good.
And I think one day somebody asked him if he was going to be at the high school football game. Now, what I failed to say is he was a deputy sheriff.
Okay.
He worked, I think, for the reserve unit for Cumberland County Sheriff's Department. So that's what ties it in. But somebody asked him one day, are you going to be at the game? And, in his cool self, he was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be at the game and I'm going to be armed and dangerous. I was like, at that point, everybody laughed. And
right.
I'm like, well, I want to be cool, armed and dangerous. That's what was on my mind in the 10th grade. But said all that to say, I had a mentor that didn't even know he was mentoring me at the time.
Right.
And that's whose footsteps that I kind of wanted to follow in. Growing up in Fayetteville, the military was just every day.
Right.
I was born on Fort Bragg.
Oh, wow.
The military was every day. And I honor and respect everybody that took that route.
Right.
It just wasn't the route for me, but it was the route that we saw everybody taking in my area pretty much. So school was my route. Then I came to North Carolina Central. So to answer the question, that's why I went into some sort of law, was because I was blessed enough to have a mentor. I was blessed enough to have somebody that I looked up to that actually cared about me.
Right.
And just later on, coming to find, his son and I became good friends. We were the same age, but we just went to two different high schools.
Wow.
But we became good friends. And so that was that. And that's why, I'm also glad that Forbes shared his story. Or you said something about Forbes and his community service and his group, the foundation, and the whole 9 yards. Because, like I told people when I retired, that people are watching you. They're watching us all the time, and it's people like my teacher and Forbes and Jesse and yourself, BJ. People are watching you, and I just think it's very important to come into law enforcement as a Black officer with something to offer, and not just be here, because we all know the name of the game is not taking everybody to jail every
That's
5
right.
minutes, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
that's how I ended up here, and just thankful enough and in the blessings that I got would be able to be in this profession and retire. So it's Harmony's a young person, and just to know that people outside growing up military really don't retire from things too much anymore. They go from this job to that job to that job to that job. So for even being as old as I am, to be able to go somewhere and actually retire from it, to me, is a blessing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Wow, you guys have totally different stories than I did. Because I'm gonna be real honest. I got this question over here, talking. I'm gonna read this in a minute about the history, but I became a police officer because the sister needed a job. I needed a job, and so it ain't. That's all that was. I was flipping burgers and working at Parks and Rec, and somebody said, "You might be a good police officer." And I looked at how much they were making. I said, "I can get that for doing one job." Sign the sister up. Because I was hustling, man. And then when I got it, it just showed you the universe and the Holy Spirit, personal pastor, tells you, puts you in the spaces you need to be in, and it fit me like a glove. And I have loved it ever since. I've loved it ever since. So yeah, it's a service doing for our community and everybody in the community and doing that. So let me get to this question that why are all police officers are looked at the same? Black officers have their own struggles being Black wearing blue. Where did the hate and distrust among Black officers come from? Black officers should not be held accountable for what white officers do. And then I think this is a follow-up. Is the problem not respecting authority, especially Black authority? I think one of the things that we do and you find, and you got, if you need me to repeat that, but I'm gonna. So why are all police officers looked at the same? Black officers have their own struggles. Where did the hate come from? And I appreciate that question because one of the things that I talk about in UN50, it's a national conversation. Obviously, right now, the court case for the murder of George Floyd is going on. Mm-hmm. And what I would put into the space is that one individual, one police officer had his knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd. That officer is responsible for his action, not the entire industry, but that individual made an individual decision not to simply remove his knee, and he was law enforcement. And the conversation for me, and I think Harvey and I on another podcast had talked about that. Yes, he was wearing a uniform, but in that moment, he did not demonstrate his humanity for the person under his knee.
Can I interrupt you real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to bring up this perspective and play devil's advocate per usual. But I remember when I was a little girl, before I would leave the house, me and my nieces, because they were around the same age as I was, we get this speech that when you leave this house, you are a representation of this last name, and you better not be out here acting a fool and bringing shame to this family. Right. And it's not to say that, police officers don't have that same accountability, but it is to say that, yes, it was an individual decision, but it is indicative of a larger problem that we've seen over and over and over again. So I think while it's important, yes, that we do have to acknowledge that there are individuals that make up these systems, the system in the way that it is designed is functioning as it should be functioning. It's doing exactly what it was intended to do. And I think that we're taking a lot of accountability away from individuals that do really and truly make up these systems.
Okay.
I can agree with that 100%. Harmony. And one thing I'll say to that is you were raised well if you got that speech every day.
We did.
So and sticking with topic, it was too many people that didn't get it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I'm talking about police officers. Because when you got it at a young age made you who you are. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I can imagine people who are, I'll say, unlike us, the people on this panel that didn't get that speech are the Chauvins or whatever his name is that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the accountability is about how the system deals with it. How do you flesh that out? I mean, how do you identify individuals who are like him or her? How does the system do that? And that's when I go back to the local. It's a national narrative, but what is Durham Police Department doing? They've got alert systems in place. The state of North Carolina, they just did the racial task force for racial equity and criminal justice. One of the things about accountability is that what they're suggesting is that if an officer gets complained on twice in a month, something needs to be done, so those are the kind of things that holding those systems. What does that look like in local agent? How do we make sure that, BJ, you've got complained on twice for whatever that is? Do we need to, get you on this track out of here? Or do we need to figure out how to help you figure out what you need to do and how you need to deliver services? So, yeah. Anybody else got any comment on that?
Well, and I think when you're talking about, say, for example, officer getting a complaint on twice. So I have a story for that as well.
Just like a pastor, but go ahead.
Yeah, I got a story for that just as well. So when I was signed to District 2, everybody knows District 2, there was a police officer kind of I was assigned to a rough team during that particular time. And I don't want to call my captain name at the time, but anyway, if you are pretty active as a young officer, sometimes you get complaints that may not be justified, right? And that happened to me a couple of times where actually this one lady called my captain and she had complained and she said, I got stopped by Officer Forbes last night and she was upset because she received a ticket, a citation. And she said, he cursed me out. And my captain was like, I know that's not true because Forbes don't even cuss. You see what I'm saying? So there needs to be a system to hold officer accountable, but we also had to make sure when we do it, it's not that someone that don't like the police or they upset because they may have received some type of enforcement and now they complain on this officer and the officer is moved out. You understand what I'm saying? Because I mean, like that happened to me a couple of times where, my complaint when they did investigation, I was clear from the complaint.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to remember is that when we are, because BJ, you advocate for this a lot as well, about filing complaints and making sure that you are basically, following that system of hierarchy. But I think that we would be naive to say or to think that just because somebody complains that they're going to be believed. We live in a system where we victim blame anyway, whether it's blaming women for their own sexual assaults, if we're blaming people for, we blame people all the time. We're a victim blaming society. So I think it would be naive of us to say that, it would even be automatically believed. I actually think it would probably go the other way, that if you were to make a complaint, it's probably less likely that you're going to be listened to, especially if it is against a police officer. I think in a larger scheme, we have this very pious view of police officers and they're to be respected and feared. And when I say feared, I don't mean like be scared of, but almost like submitted to. So, I guess for me does that mean that we shouldn't have the 2 complaint limit? Or does that mean that we just have to put extra resources towards validating or invalidating these claims? Because I think the conversation a lot of the times when I've heard it has been either or. Either, this is too much, people can say whatever they want to say because they're angry. And then other people are like, well, I file 5 complaints against the same officer. Why did y'all not do anything? And it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive or black and white because we're human. So there's a lot of gray area that I think exists, especially when interpretation is up for your own interpretation, really.
Yeah, no, and let me make sure there's not a limit. It's just what they're saying is they don't need to wait till there's till the officer shot somebody 16 times in the back. There's if you've got 2 complaints within a month, something's going on. And I told you,
but even at my job, I'm held to that standard.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just making sure everybody understands. And that's, I think, I think that also sends a message through the culture that, you get 2 complaints, whatever they are, they're going to be, you got to come in and talk to me. And people should be, I want people to feel comfortable in filing their complaints. There's no don't file complaints. Right. I mean, we just had Mr. DeWarren Langley, Harmony, you couldn't make, you had asked him to come on. He went through the Civilian Review Board. And he's the chair of that. So he went through that process and, making sure that there's no abuse of discretion within the agency. I know Harmony and maybe I'm not going to sustain this one. So they got 9 civilians from the walks of the city to review that. So, I mean, for those of you that want to hear that, that'll be posted, hopefully in a couple of weeks. But yeah, so yeah, we need to allow people to do that and filing complaints. And you guys have to correct me, is that most police officers, if they like me, they just want to catch a check. They don't want to end up losing their jobs and getting dismissed because and again, Harmon, we're human. Right. We're going to make mistakes. Obviously some going to be egregious. But for the most part, some days, there's no such thing as you need to leave that at the house.
Right. I guess my thing is this, if I sell insurance, so I deal with a lot of angry people all the time. Nobody wants to talk about insurance. Hell, I don't even want to talk about insurance most of the time, but it's my job. So it's what I do. So I deal with a lot of angry people. And here's the thing. If my customers were complaining about the way that I've been suggesting things to them, the way that I was selling to them, whether it was I was not responsive enough, I didn't give them correct answers, I would be in trouble. Not only would I be in trouble not in trouble, but I would, have to answer to my direct management. But if I've made a larger issue, I myself and the business is at risk of an E&O claim.
Right.
Errors and omissions claim.
Right.
And so my thing is, if an insurance agent can be held this responsible, surely a police department that has sophisticated resources can do a better job of examining complaints. And not only examining, but acknowledging, because I find that a lot of people who do complain don't necessarily expect there to be any type of action. They just want to be heard. And I wonder how impactful it would be for the civilians that have made complaints. And, you know, I'm not one to say that you can interpret an event differently based on your emotions, because you absolutely can. But I think being seen and being acknowledged, like, we understand your complaint. We take this seriously. This is our process. I believe personally that should be the response to every single complaint filed against a police officer, because I wonder how many times, I don't even know the dude's name that killed George Floyd, whatever he doesn't even deserve to have his name spoken, whatever his name is. I wonder how many incidents there were where someone could have intervened, whether that was somebody on his team. Like, we saw his brothers in blue, or whatever you want to call them. They didn't do anything. And that has to be a culture and internal shift of holding each other accountable. Police, I've seen the tactics, you know, everybody knows that they look for somebody that's going to break right, that's going to tell the truth, that's going to crack the case wide open and give them that smoking gun. And police officers could do that for one another. They could hold each other accountable in that way. And I think that that's also an important conversation that maybe we can explore. If that's something that you guys had experienced while you were in the force, like, how did you do it? Because to me, it almost seems like this band of brotherhood, like it's like this inherent loyalty where you're not supposed to go against, you know, the person that stands beside you and is subjected to the same things that you are on a day-to-day. So I don't know if any of you have any perspective on that, but I would be really interested in hearing how it was handled, if you handled it. If you didn't handle it, how do you wish that you done it now, having the information that you have today?
All right, so let me say this. You know, the team that I work with, one of the teams, the street drug unit, you know, if you can be in a situation, let's just say if I'm dealing with a suspect, right? And the suspect may hit me, strike me in the face, or whatever. One thing that my team, we would do is say, okay, Forbes, if you are directly involved, and if I see that you are maybe I think you're using too much force, then I'm going to come and intervene. And that's what we did. And so, for example, if an officer was hit by a suspect, take off, you get in a foot chase, you catch the person. If I felt like the officer was maybe too involved with the situation, I would step between and say, hey, I got it. Mm-hmm. And when I did that, the officer knew to back off.
Right.
Now, if I had an officer didn't back off when I say I got it, then that's take it to a different level where then, of course, you're going to get the supervisor and internal affairs involved. But that's one way that you can hold each other accountable, is understand that if you see something not right, then, I mean, you jump in and you take control of the situation.
And I love that you guys were able to acknowledge that when you're in that moment, you perceive things differently. Like, fight or flight is a real thing. The way that adrenaline hits people is a very, very real thing. And when you're directly involved in it, I imagine that sometimes that, you know, what we would consider excessive to the person in the moment might seem justified. So I really like that you guys were able to acknowledge the humanness of each other. And also, I'm sure, save each other from a lot of difficulty that would have been faced had you not been, I would say, a good enough friend, a good enough teammate to intervene, because I know that that's never easy. Right.
I would like to follow up just a little bit because I loved your perspective. You said several things, and I'll ask BJ and Forbes both for their input. This thin blue line and the whole thing about you're not going to tell on each other and it doesn't run as deep as a lot of people think, especially, like I said before, about being a Black officer. We're not always included in things.
In that, absolutely.
Or just in things, period. Okay,
gotcha.
and the reason I say that, Harmony, is because there are a lot of times where you may have officers that won't do the same thing simply because a Black officer is around.
Mm-hmm.
You follow me? And I think that has a lot to do with the character of the officer, no matter if they're Black or white. But you come upon situations where, I know I'm not going to get away with this around Officer Forbes. I'm not going to get away with this around them. They might do it around each other. Mm-hmm. But that whole, it just, you can ask officers, and a lot of times, like I said before, we have to start in our communities, because there are a lot of things that go on that we see on the news, that we see, worldwide, that may not have or doesn't happen in your local department, but the local department, all police officers get blamed for it. You know what I mean? And it's not, I don't want, if that officer was on that man's neck, and everybody in the world should know that was wrong. Everybody in the world, I'll speak for myself, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, knows he murdered that guy. Right. In my opinion, in any other officer's opinion I talk to. One thing about police departments and police officers, you should have been well trained. And it's in my opinion, to talk about this particular case, you can't have 4 or 5, however many other officers that were there that should have been that well trained, that had to treat that individual the way that they treated them. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
This George Floyd was in custody. A man laying on the ground or even put in a car in handcuffs was in custody already. Nothing outside of that should have happened. But one thing, we are, and I'll speak specifically about the Durham Police Department. Durham Police Department is a very well-trained police department. I'm not saying it's never happened. I'm not saying it will never happen. But with the training that officers get, with the equipment and the resources that they have, that was just very uncalled for. And we see it over and over and over again.
Yeah. Jess, you got anything?
I do know that a lot of officers' cases are investigated at the Durham PD. If you report it, it's investigated. And if it's just a he said, she said kind of thing, then I think the investigators have to give the officer the benefit of the doubt. But a lot of times officers, and I mean a lot of times, officers receive discipline for quote unquote breaking the rules, but we don't share what that discipline is with the public because of personnel privacy laws. We can't do it. So from that standpoint, I think the public tends to believe that sworn officers get away with any and everything, and that's just not true.
Since you brought that up, one of the things I know Durham did, and I learned about it after I left, that you guys started doing was, if there's a complaint on Harmony and about a particular policy or procedure, and let's say it's sustained, which sustained means guilty, you guys say the complaint was sustained, and these, based on this particular violation, this is what she could get, the officer can get. And then you would list them, I guess written reprimand, suspension, blah, blah, all the way down to termination. So the individual knows that one of those things happened to Harmony, one of those. Now, if they see Harmony, they know it wasn't termination. So, but they know that she got something. Yeah, and I've talked to a couple of agencies since I've found out about it, since I've been retired, and I tell them what you guys are doing. I mean, I think that's so transparent, because now at least the person walks away, well, they sustained it and they got something. And which also I used to tell folks, you have no idea as an executive that I might be sitting there going, I just need one more complaint on this officer. I just need one more complaint on this officer because I got to get rid of them. And then nobody files a complaint. Because, there are things that we have to do internally. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciated you guys doing that. When I found out about that, I was so excited. I've been telling other the agencies that I work with that's transparency, because you're now saying sustained, she was guilty, and these are the ones she's going to get. And I think that's helpful.
I would like to talk about Harmony's point as well on complaints and needing to do a better job on investigating complaints. And I'm going to go back to just our department. And this is one thing that needs to happen. One thing, we're trying to work on federal rules and regulations that every department has to abide by, not just everybody picking their own. Now, Durham, excuse me, is in a good place because we do have our Citizens Oversight Committee. It's not what it's called, but that's what it is.
Civilian is a civilian review board. You ain't been gone that long. You didn't remember.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Citizens Review Board. We have it. So getting back to BJ's point, if more people do file the formal complaint, because let's just be honest, you have people who will complain and people who bitch, moan, and complain.
Well, it's heard it here, folks.
It's a difference.
Yeah.
So you can talk to your neighbor about it. You can talk to another officer about it. But if I agree with BJ 100%, if you feel like you were not treated fairly, file the complaint. Mm-hmm. And that's not a complaint can do as much good for an officer than it can bad, by clearing them once it's investigated up to the Civilian Review Board. Because if that complainant is not satisfied, then it can go to the Civilian Review Board and let a whole board of civilians look at it, and then they come up with theirs. But I agree, every department doesn't. But I want to stay local, because just like your neighborhood, if you clean up your house first, and your neighbors clean their houses, the next thing you know, your neighborhood is nice. I don't understand, Durham can be a model agency, but they can't do it without the support of the citizens.
Right. Exactly.
Let me ask y'all this question. Do any of you know what percentage of cases the Citizens Review Board overturned? In other words, let's say where our investigators didn't sustain a complaint and it got to the Citizens Review Board. Do any of you have any idea how many the Citizens Review Board say, go back and take a look at this because we think this should have been sustained?
Yeah, well, like I said, I just talked to DeWarren, and it's low. Because
I think it is much low, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he went back to like 2014 when he's been the chair, and he was saying since those fiscal years, less than really 3 have even come before the board that they actually, had to review themselves. Right. He didn't even say anything about like overturning them or making that it went against the agency. Just the fact that they allowed it to be just to come to the board after they looked at it. So yeah, I mean it's low. So the agency is doing, because I guess the thing is they've got these non-civilians from the community that they know they're looking at them, and so kudos to them, because they're whatever they're sending to them. They're doing what they're supposed to do, and obviously the civilian support the investigations, and then the citizens, for most of what I could tell from his discussion, and those of you that might want to listen to that, are okay with what the Civilian Review says. So yeah, I mean it's a good system. It's working for Durham. It's at least working for Durham. What were you going to say, Forbes?
Yeah, I want to go back to something Chief Sembly was talking about. When we talk about complaints or or when officers do right and wrong, it really comes down to the individual officer integrity. And because, I don't want people to get the wrong understanding. We saying, white officers are bad, because I know some white officer have came to me and spilled the beans on some things that they didn't agree with. And even to the point where they probably could have taken another action and they actually looked out for the suspect. So I look at it that, there's problem in police that needs to be addressed. But again, it comes down to the individual, whether you're black or white, whatever your race may be, what's on the inside of your heart, if you're going to do the right or the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I totally appreciate you saying that. I can't even right now. I mean, I think we also have to, especially for our white brothers and sisters out there that are getting it done, right. How difficult it is for them at this moment, how right. frustrating it is for them in this moment, because they're basically being judged on the actions of others. All law right. enforcement is at this point. Right. But it's unfortunate, but that's something they've got to figure out. How do they, I think what I like to say is how are they got to do a little extra lifting to make sure that who they are is viewed beyond the uniform. I mean, they've right. got to get the community to see them, not see the uniform, but they got to get them to see them as another human interacting with another human. And that's just a lot of extra work on them due right. to the actions of a few in this industry. That's a good industry. Mm-hmm. It's a good industry. So anybody else, we kind of make sure we don't have any other questions out here, but you guys got any last comments that you want to talk about?
I'll give a last. Are we closing out?
I mean, you go right ahead. We'll
okay. This is a close.
We're not getting ready to close it out, but you do you. We should hang for a little while. Go ahead.
Well, and this is a closing out kind of comment. I just feel like I would like to see the big thing now is community policing.
Yes.
And I just really feel like if we being police professionals can get the community a little more active in community policing mm-hmm. and understand that you can be involved in your not just police department, but local government, period. It would really help. And the reason I say that is a lot of times police departments take on programs and different things within their community that they are in charge of, mm-hmm. that they run. And it really should be more of community input mm-hmm. For your local programs, for community policing issues as a whole. Mm-hmm. I think we're missing more. We're missing more community from the community policing side of this thing. So I would ask people, especially in Durham, get involved with what's going on in your community. And I don't mean like, every time something goes wrong, mm-hmm. You want to, do whatever. But before it gets to that point, you can give opinion. You can get involved in PALs. You can get involved in other programs that we have and give your input to what's going on. Again, I'll say I don't see why Durham or any other department can't be the model department. Right. But the big thing now is 21st century policing, and in my opinion, any of the 6 tenets of 21st century policing will work very well with community input and community involvement.
Totally agree. Now, look, this comment, I want to read part of this comment and then I think it's police. This comment was police departments sometimes hire candidates that look great on paper, but they're not really well trained or well suited to deal with people that they are not like them. They perform well in training environment, but when they're assigned to a district, they have to interact with people that they have not been used to dealing with. That's where the problems come in. And I think it's about focus. Training has to change in how we recruit. We need to do more. I think we need to change, almost kind of like they're doing colleges, so what kind of volunteering have you been doing? Those types of things. And the training, this person is absolutely right. Because if you are not used to being around Black folks and the only thing that you're looking at is stuff on TV or you have this, your experience is not going to allow you to possibly communicate. It doesn't mean that you're racist or anything like that. But if you don't understand the community and the training and that has not been afforded to you, it could be an issue in real world. And so I would also, we're going to put this on a link on my website or that you can go to. But that's one thing that this task force, again, I'm bringing it up again, that they have talked about is training. Training needs to be longer. It needs to be, interpersonal skills, how to communicate, diversity training, all that. And just, it really does get down, what kind of empathy, the psychological stuff, more of that on the front end. And they've even suggested that, obviously you get that in the front end psychological work, but when you begin to be promoted, maybe before you're promoted, they're suggesting that. And then you guys may be familiar with this. I heard one police department, I don't know whether Durham is doing this, but if you're on a particular career track, what they're also saying for some agencies, if you want to be a sergeant, then I need you to go to community meetings and I'm not going to give you overtime. Because if you're willing to come out and not get paid, that kind of shows me as an administrator, you're committed because you're willing to do things like that. So how we recruit and who we recruit is going to have a whole different look as we start moving forward because of this, not because of this moment, but in order to get folks that are empathetic and all those kind of things. So, so I appreciate that. So, community policing is it. Community got to be involved. We talked about that on defunding police when we did that broadcast about that. The not pretty side of this conversation is going to budget meetings. The not pretty side of this movement is you got to be in the room where the dollars are and figure out, what you want, how you want your police department to be and all that kind of stuff and where you want that money to go and what that's going to look like. So for those of you, if you want, you can take a look at that on our podcast. So I think we're close to the end. I want to appreciate you guys. Gonna have any parting words?
I would just like to say I thought this was a good conversation. I would be interested in people that have joined us. If anyone would like to have a certain topic for us to discuss at a later date.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much.
Make sure that we giving them what they would like.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And like I said, this is our first live. We may do another one later on in the year, but we'll have our regular podcast. And so I appreciate that. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to those of you that joined us on Facebook. I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Harmony, as always, for your input. Jesse, thank you very much. Terrence, enjoy the beach. Yes, I'm jealous. And my personal pastor, as always, it's always good to see you. Thank you, ma'am. And for those of you that join us, thanks again for joining us. Listen to our podcast, visit us on my website. It's all about going home, comply, then complain. We want folks to get to the house. So as always, stay well, stay safe, peace.